So a lot of people with a disability, and we're obviously talking about a mental ill health disability here, are blocked by society in applying for jobs because of their, society's incorrect perception. So what advice would you give to employers? So you study and you work. So what advice would you give to employers who are probably quite nervous and don't know how to manage situations around self-harm? I've heard of terrible stories where people have been ignored. They've got hearing impairment and the company literally just ignore them. They think, oh, if we just kind of ignore them, it'll all go away and it'll all be okay. Well, actually, that's really unkind. So what should an employer do, whether they're interviewing or they employ somebody that self-harms, so that they feel educated from what you're about to say? What advice would you give to them?
I think that first off, interviewing in a comfortable environment, in a relaxed environment, because sometimes formal environments can be quite stressful and anxiety inducing for people who struggle with self-harm for various issues. And I think listening to what different people's individual needs are, because just because two people self-harm, it doesn't mean that their needs are the same, but allowing space for your employees to take a break if they need to, if emotions are running high, and just being understanding of the fact that it's not just work that's affecting people's emotions. There can be stuff going on behind closed doors. Offering a listening ear if that's something that your employee wants to talk about. It might not be, but it's nicer to have the option there. And I also think for people that are struggling with self-harm, as long as you're putting what you need across, employers are normally a lot more accommodating than you expect them to be. I know that my employers have been very accommodating. They know that sometimes I have quite intense emotional outbursts that I need to go and take 5 minutes for, and they allow for that. They know sometimes that after a self-harm relapse, I'll need to take some time off work, take some time away, or my mood might be affected at work, and they're very accommodating of that. I know that's not the same for all working scenarios, but I think people do want to help, so knowing the right ways to help, and telling people what help you need is going to help you and them in the long run.
That's what I was going to ask, actually. So should employers, I mean, when you interview, it's like, do you have a disability? Do you need any reasonable adjustments? So, and a lot of people will say no, they haven't got a disability, because the fear that the employer just won't even let them come for an interview. What could an employer do just to allow that individual to feel safe enough to say, I have these difficulties and this is what I need? I mean, you're saying listening, having some quiet time, but if an employer isn't accommodating like that, how it might be a very, very fast environment, it might be a very loud environment, how could they manage that situation better?
I think that in the interview process, I think it's important to make it clear that you are running an inclusive company or a business that accepts people with all disabilities, whether that's a mental disability or a physical disability. And I think, so when it says on forms and stuff asking if you need reasonable adjustment, normally the examples they give are only of like hearing impairment or different physical disabilities. So having examples of reasonable adjustments for people with mental health issues, so whether that be if they need to stop the interview at any time to take a breather and get their anxiety under control, because it's things like that people with mental health issues in themselves don't even think about, because they don't think that it's an option. So an employer making it obvious that that is an option makes it easier for us to think about the reasonable adjustments that we might need.
That's really, really helpful, actually. That's really, really helpful. That's a very simple thing that an employer can do, isn't it? Put it on the form, different types of reasonable adjustments. So it, like you say, it makes the person that's being interviewed kind of go, it's okay, because they obviously are aware that sometimes people need that. And I've never ever heard of that example, but that is really fantastic. And it's a really simple thing that an employer could do. It doesn't cost any money and only takes 5 minutes, to put that on the application forms. So that is a really, really helpful thing. So I hope that all, employers will really benefit from that advice. Thank you very much. So you were saying a minute ago about something really nice that your line manager does. Do you want to share that with everybody?
Yeah, so when I first got my diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, I sat down and spoke about some reasonable adjustments with her and explained to her my different struggles. And she went away and read up about it a little bit, which was really nice because it meant that I didn't have to go into complete detail about everything that goes on for me. She had sort of a general idea of what was going on, which was really nice. It helps reduce the stigma surrounding the mental health issue and made it a lot less awkward for me because I didn't feel like I had to discuss in depth my personal issues, and she knew sort of roughly what was going on, which I think is something really small and really simple that employers can do to make their employees feel comfortable and safe.
So I think there's some really good points there in that doing the at the application stage, offering some suggestions for other reasonable adjustments that would be helpful for the mental ill health difficulties. And then you've already started that open conversation then, haven't you? That open understanding that somebody would need some different adjustments in the workplace. And then, like you say, with your employer reading about your BPD, that was really helpful. So that opened those conversations up as well. And I think opening those conversations up, which are kind and respectful, but I think what's happened in the past is people have been too frightened and not talked about things. But I suppose from what you said, there are ways to open conversations up so you can help understand each other.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that fright is sort of on both ends because, especially through the interview process, it's such an anxiety-provoking process that people think, people with mental health issues think that if they need to take time out, it's going to affect how the employer views them and then the employer's not going to want to employ them. But really, if they took 5 minutes out to help their anxiety or whatever emotional feelings that they need to get under control, they're likely to then do better in the rest of the interview. But there's different sort of feelings going on, thinking about what the employer is going to think if you need to take that time, and it might disadvantage you in getting the job in the application. So I think making people feel comfortable to do that is really, really important.
And I think something you just said there as well is something I've never heard before, is that fright on both ends. I suppose I'd only kind of considered the fear that an employer would have of getting things wrong, but I didn't really think about fear that an applicant or an employee would kind of feel as well. So again, those open conversations, it does remove that fear and those barriers and those boundaries, doesn't it?
A lot of people with self-harm issues and mental health issues are very self-aware, very self-conscious, and are very aware of the stigma that comes with mental health issues. So we kind of expect it when we go into a new environment, whether that be an interview, employment, or anywhere else. We're expecting the stigma, so there is anxiety and fright there on our end as well.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.